Oh. Is this game worth it? Eh. Does that answer your question?
Gives new meaning to the phrase, hard as iron! As iron! As iron!
Cyberpunk 2077 was that really hyped up fancy schmancy video game that required you to have a much better computer than mine to play it. It was created and released by CD Projekt, the company that made The Witcher 3 and whatever the hell came before that. After 9 long years of being stuck in development hell and several delays later, it was finally released to the public in 2020. And boy howdy, that was quite an event.
I mean, that really got out of hand fast.
Cyberpunk Edgerunners, on the other hand, is an anime series that serves as a prequel to the games, I think. I haven't played the game, so I'm not really quite sure where this show fits into the timeline. All I know for sure is that apparently the entire community had nothing but good things to say after the release. I mean, just look at that Rotten Tomato score. Hot damn.
Very impressive.
Seems like despite the never-ending curse of horrible video game adaptations, Cyberpunk Edgerunners has somehow managed to avoid such an outcome. Whether that's due to it having an actual good story or because of overwhelmingly low expectations, however, is what I intend to find out today. And you know just how much I love to ruin people's fun. So buckle up folks, sit back, relax, and let's see what Studio Trigger has cooked up for us. To the future! Edgerunners takes place in the murky trenches of Night City, where a futuristic society that's almost entirely connected to the internet resides. Although that might sound appealing to you basement dwellers out there, it's not all it's cracked up to be. In reality, this metropolis that our characters are forced to live in has an incredibly oppressive social hierarchy that puts those with money and power over the common folk. Wow, it's just like my world. There must be some deep social commentary here somewhere. I'm so smart.
Look how deep I am.
Our protagonist, David Martinez, is a semi-rebellious teenage boy who's living in the gutters of the city with Gloria, his single mother who's constantly overworking herself so that she can send him to a prestigious school despite the fact that they are very short on cash and he doesn't fit in there. Aw, what a sweet and loving mother. I'm sure nothing bad's going to happen. Due to the overwhelming corruption and chaos in Night City, David and his mom end up getting dragged into a drive-by shooting on their way home. Fortunately, David managed to come out of it relatively unscathed. His mom though, she ends up kicking the bucket because they didn't have the cash to pay for additional insurance, so the doctor just didn't operate on her. Mind you, he finds out about her death after he got his shit kicked in by his classmate who basically threatened him to drop out of school because they're rich douchebags who hate poor people. Then, after hearing the tragic news of his mom, said classmate who kicked his ass proceeds to call David just to mock him about it.
Heard about your mom. I'd offer my sympathies, but find it hard to sympathize. God only knows what she had to endure to send her delinquent son to an academy he doesn't belong at. Her methods couldn't have been noble if she died in a car accident. So mundane. But you know, karma. There's a lesson in this, David. Your mother tried to live beyond her means and died. Don't make the same mistake.
They couldn't have written this guy to be any more comically evil. Anyway, after rummaging through some of his mom's stuff, David finds military-grade cybernetic implants in her jacket. In a fit of rage, he goes to this underground doctor he got acquainted with before the start of the series and asks him to surgically install the implants into him so that he can get some sweet, sweet revenge. And revenge he got indeed. Shortly after getting expelled due to his little stunt, David runs into Lucy, a really hot thief who initially tries to rob him before they end up working together to cause a little mischief. After a bunch of jumbled up series of events, David gets acquainted with the Edgerunners, a group of mercenaries who implant themselves with various types of cyberware to commit crimes in Night City's underworld. After proving himself to all the members that he's got what it takes to live life on the edge,
I'm built different.
David eventually joins their crew and thus begins his whole new life filled with adventures and funerals. Okay, so right off the bat, I want to cut through all the bullshit and just tell you that the writing in this show is probably its biggest weakness. And no, I'm not saying that as some kind of indirect way to compliment the production, Giguk.
And then there's the writing. Out of everything, this is probably the least strongest aspect, but I'm only saying that because everything else was absolutely stellar.
You're a pussy.
I mean, the script is legitimately pretty lackluster and at times just downright ridiculous. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying the story is completely dog shit or anything. There are definitely quite a few things to like, and it did have me hooked for a majority of the runtime. That said, a lot of the plot lines that we go through usually have a pretty abrupt and almost rushed feeling of execution. Take the death of David's mom, for example, which I've seen a fair bit of people say is really sad, and I'm sorry, but I just do not agree. The woman barely had any bit of screen time, and the small amount that we did get, although not bad, was hardly enough to get us attached to her. She kinda just appears, shows a bit of care that any good mother would show, and then dies. We didn't even really spend enough time with David at this point in time to form a strong connection with him as a character. Sure, I feel sorry for him from a general perspective, but aside from a small bit of pity, the death of his parental figure didn't elicit any sort of strong emotion from me whatsoever, and that's kind of the case for most of the show. For me, a lot of it seems incredibly rushed and doesn't give you quite enough time to really get invested with anything. Yeah, the animation and the whole spectacle of Night City is incredibly eye-catching and immersive, but once I got over the initial astonishment, the story just felt extremely shallow. If it were up to me, I would have given an extra episode or two dedicated to just David and his mom going through their everyday lives. Let us get accustomed to them as characters, how they act in their natural environments, and how they cope with their daily issues like real people. This would have allowed us to form a proper bond and get attached to them as characters, which would have made Gloria's death much more memorable.
Well, okay, so maybe the story isn't all it's cracked up to be, but you have to admit that the characters are really, really good. It's the best part of the whole show.
That's kind of, yeah, that's debatable. But that does open up an entirely new can of worms that we need to address, so let's just get into that. The Cyberpunk anime features an incredibly colorful cast of characters, each with their own little quirks and unique brand of charm. While a lot of people will tell you that the story is oh so amazing and greatly written, even more of the fanbase will talk your ears off about how brilliant the characters are, and honestly, it's not hard to see why. While I myself don't exactly find them to be the pinnacle of character writing, Cyberpunk's main cast is without a doubt its strongest aspect. As previously mentioned, David joins a group called the Edgerunners, a ragtag team of misfits who are working under a mysterious and powerful man by the name of Faraday, who's also an elite among the higher echelons of Night City.
Unimaginable wealth.
David himself is a pretty solid protagonist, with the typical goal of finding a place to belong while trying to survive another day. For the most part, he acts about as naturally as a teenage boy in his current situation would act. He's impulsive, reckless, scared, yet cocky, and obviously in way over his head. While those traits themselves aren't exactly positive, he's constantly being tested and challenged by those around him, and is consistently being reminded that this mercenary life that he finds oh so exciting is in no way a game. He can be pretty annoying at times, but the show does a good job with setting up his character to make it so that his idiotic tendencies is not only understandable, but also completely in line with his personality and ideals. Additionally, he also does learn and grow pretty darn quickly. Whether or not that was intentional good writing or another case of the show rushing through shit and having it accidentally work out, I'll leave it up to you. That said, he's definitely not a perfect character by any means, and a lot of his problems are at their most prominent whenever he's around the main girl of the series. Enter Lucy, the team's resident netrunner, which is basically just a fancy name for this world's equivalent of a futuristic hacker. Her relationship with David is one of the biggest focal points of the story, and she's easily one of the most important characters in terms of progressing the plot. David gets his first taste of the underworld after working with her for the first time. He gets acquainted with the Edgerunners through her, and she also becomes the biggest driving force in his life later on in the series, and that's honestly one of my biggest issues. If you separate the two and look at them objectively as individual characters, they work well enough in their respective roles. However, their relationship as a whole, despite being the strongest one in the show, is incredibly flimsy and at times just painfully sappy. Now, I know David has a lot to be thankful for towards Lucy, considering the fact that she practically gave him another chance to live a completely new life. That said, I still think the show really jumped the gun with the direction they took with their bond. Think about it, their first meeting literally consisted of her trying to rob David before proceeding to pin him to a wall and threatening his life when she was caught with her pants down. Sure, they hashed it out and decided to work together in the end, but the whole exchange should have left David feeling much more cautious around her, but instead he starts getting goo-goo eyes.
Oh, come on, he's a hormonal teenage boy. Plus, she saved his life afterwards, so that's probably why he started catching feelings.
You dumb! You dumb! What are you looking at me for?
Yeah, dude, hormones are definitely enough to make a hot-blooded teenage boy excuse an unknown bitch trying to rob and threaten him. Typical boys, am I right? Also saving him? Sure, I guess an argument could be made that she helped him out because she felt like doing the right thing, but it's also pretty darn obvious that she was doing it for her own selfish reasons. For one, she made it a point that she was going to decrease his cut of the money as compensation for this rescue, so she definitely wasn't doing this out of the goodness of her heart. Additionally, she probably figured out at this point that David was holding her leader's stolen cybernetic implant, and so she was probably trying to not let it get into enemy hands. It wasn't David she was saving, it was the Sandevistan that she was after, which is why she didn't care about these several reckless stunts she was doing for the sake of his so-called rescue. David should have figured that out when he woke up to 3 gangsters assaulting him after coming over to her house. Are we really just going to ignore the fact that she basically led a stupid, ignorant kid on just so she could hand him over to her boss? The only reason David ended up A-OK is because of his innate talent of being a protagonist. The whole betrayal should have been enough to put a giant fucking wedge in their relationship, but instead David basically just shrugs it off, and in fact he has an even bigger hard-on for her. Also, at first I actually liked the idea of Lucy just lying out of her ass about the whole going to space thing as an attempt to keep David distracted until her gang arrives, because, yeah, that makes perfect sense. The entire short time we've known her, she's shown to be nothing but arrogant, selfish, and clearly a little crazy. Why the hell would she share something about her personal feelings and grievances to some snot-nosed little brat that she just met? Putting on this show to play with his feelings like this would have been completely in character, but of course, it's revealed later on that this was, in fact, her true intimate feelings that she just shared with an at the time complete stranger. I'm not saying that these two don't have chemistry whatsoever, but their entire relationship was, in my opinion, very poorly handled. I do not believe for one second that they spent enough time together to build a close personal bond. There was enough bullshit in between to make it difficult for them to even be friends, let alone romantic partners. Yet here we are, a shallow and rushed relationship that did not feel organic whatsoever. But I guess we can excuse it because it's nicely drawn and had nice music playing over it. As for the other characters, what is there to really be said? I know I've been saying this for basically the entire video, but I need you to really understand just how much a mere 10 episodes is not enough to tell a story of this scale in a compelling manner. It's especially insufficient when you're making it a competition to see how much of the cast you can kill off in the shortest amount of time. A lot of the characters lack any sort of depth to them. They've got likable surface level personalities, but there's not much else you can get out of them. Most of them don't have any semblance of their backstories revealed or any sort of personal motivation that we can root for. We're not even given enough time to get attached to them before the show decides to kill them off for shock value. I'm sorry, but I just felt absolutely nothing for about 90% of the deaths that occurred within this show. If anything, I found myself just getting mildly annoyed instead, because a lot of them are just really anticlimactic or just downright stupid. Overall, Cyberpunk Edgerunners is an incredibly expensive show with some really amazing animation and great music. Unfortunately, the production is really the only thing that makes it stand out, as the story and characters are all pretty mediocre at best. I know this entire review might make it sound as though I hated this anime, but believe me, this is just me being extra critical for the sake of trying to stay as objective as possible. In truth, although I wasn't as blown away by it as everybody else, I did thoroughly enjoy watching this show, as it does still have quite a good number of things to like. In conclusion, I give it a 20 out of 77.
Get out! Get out!